In our previous discussions about how stars formed, I mentioned that planets could form around stars. And so planets around other stars actually have two different names that mean the same thing. Extrasolar planets, and that's how I learned it, because this is how they were being referred to at the very beginning, was extrasolar planets. And so I will often use that term because I'm familiar with it. You'll find some books that are written that describe them as extrasolar planets. Another more modern term is exoplanets, which means the same thing. Both of these mean planets around other stars. Exoplanets actually comes from other studies, though, because once you started talking about planets around other stars, you began to realize that maybe some of those could be habitable. And so that raises the whole question is, what would life be like outside the solar system or even outside of Earth? And so biologists have started a study of the conditions necessary for life and the kind of things that life could actually be like. And so they call that exobiology. And so astronomers gradually started adopting how the other sciences name this stuff, and they began calling these exoplanets. I still like extrasolar planets because this is more an astronomical way of naming things because it states exactly what you're talking about. Exoplanets, you have to understand a little bit to know what they're talking about. One of the first to suggest that stars might have their own planets was Giordano Bruno. Bruno lived in the 16th century and was actually burned at the stake in 1600 for saying that the reason that you didn't see parallax was the stars were really far away. Because they're really far away, they must be like suns. And then he went on and said because the Earth goes around the sun and the planets go around the sun, because he believed that Copernicus was right, that meant Earth was a planet. And he went one step further and said, well, that means that if Earth is a planet, the planets are worlds like Earth. And then he said, well, the planets around other stars would be worlds. And then he went one step further and said, oh, wait, if they're like worlds, they must all have people on them. So he assumed that all these planets were inhabited, and then decided that meant that Christ had to come and be crucified on each of the planets to offer everybody salvation, and for that they burned him at the stake for heresy. But one thing that he did have going for him was that he was actually right that Earth is a planet, and that the planets are in fact not just dots or moving stars, that they are in fact worlds like Earth. But the idea that other stars might have planets was kind of revolutionary. The idea languished in astronomy for a long time and was seriously resurrected in the 1800s when they started beginning to the idea of realizing what stars were. But then it was like a big mystery. Why does the sun have planets? So why would other stars have planets? So they didn't really know where planets came from. And it was when they started to learn how stars formed that they began to realize that planets could possibly form as a byproduct of star formation. Otto Struve, an American-Russian astronomer, immigrated to the United States, actually grandson of Otto Wilhelm Struve, a Russian astronomer who rose to great prominence quite a number of years earlier in the 1800s. But our Otto Struve worked at the University of Chicago, and he believed that the accretion disk that would form in the process of star formation could clump up and make planets. And so that would suggest that planets ought to form as a byproduct of ordinary star formation. Prior to this idea, people were having all kind of crazy ideas about where planets came from. That planets might come from a collision of something with a star, or planets might come from passing stars pulling streamers of stuff out from a star that's forming or something, all of which would make planets very, very rare to have just the right conditions. Struve thought, though, that the actual process of star formation was sufficient in and of itself to yield the idea that planets might form. He also tended to follow along with Bruno's idea, and that is if you have a whole bunch of planets, if planets are pretty normal to form, then that means a lot of sun-type stars might have planets. And if sun-type stars have planets, if they have a planet in the right spot, in other words, the right distance from the right kind of star, and if that planet is the right size, now there's a lot of ifs in there, then that would suggest that potentially that such a planet could be habitable. And in lieu of any contravening evidence, he assumed, therefore, that if enough habitable planets exist, at least some of them will have life on them. There are so many stars in the universe that the idea that if only a small number of them have habitable planets, and if only some of those have life on them, there should be a lot of life in the universe. So he thought that life was fairly abundant in the universe. And he even assumed that the intelligent life could be possible. And he was in on some of the earliest studies of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so this kind of leads back to his idea that planets are pretty normal sort of things. But despite his beliefs, no one had found any planets for a long time. And in fact, by the time he died, the only planets that were known were the ones in the solar system. Finding planets on other stars is very, very difficult. In fact, the very first planet around another star was not found until the 1990s. And so that begins the serious study of planets around other stars. While in the 1990s, there was the first planet discovered on another star, as the technology has increased in recent years, we have found a lot of planets. In fact, the technology just became available in the 1990s, and since then, it's only gotten a little bit better, and that allows a lot of planets to be found. In fact, by the date that I'm recording this lecture, which is September 30th, there were over 4,300 known planets around other stars. Now, those are the confirmed planets around other stars. There's about 3,000 other planets that have been announced by various astronomers. That doesn't, if you announce you discover a planet, that doesn't mean there's a planet there. That just means that there might be a planet there. Even if you're positive there's a planet there, it doesn't count as a discovery unless someone else is able to come along and analyze and confirm, yes, there is a planet there. And so this requires independent confirmation. So now, most of these planets are discovered from very narrow searches of just certain parts of the sky or certain kinds of stars. And the only planets that we are able to discover using current technology are the particularly easy ones to discover. If we looked at our solar system from a long ways away, it'd be very difficult to actually find any of the planets. Because the planets around the planets like in our solar system turn out to be hard to find. So the planets we're finding are not necessarily the most common kind of planets. We're finding the easiest to find. Now, the fact that we have found over 4,000 of these in just a couple decades or so, that suggests that planets are in fact extremely abundant in the galaxy. And that would seem to mean that Otto Struve was actually onto something here in his suggestion that planets are very, very common.